The darkness around them felt unnaturally thick, the kind that pressed down on your chest and made it hard to breathe. Captain Roy Patterson blinked awake, his head pounding, and his body aching from the impact of something hard and metallic. The last thing he remembered was the mission: secure the area, neutralize the threat, get out. But that was Earth. This was something else entirely. He could barely see, but he could hear them, the soft murmurs of other soldiers waking up, rustling in the unfamiliar foliage. The air was dense, humid, carrying the scent of something alien. He looked up, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through an unfamiliar jungle canopy. The sky was different, a strange hue, and the trees were massive, their leaves unnaturally large and sharp-edged, like blades. "Where the hell are we?" whispered Sergeant Diaz, crouched low beside him, eyes scanning their surroundings. "No idea," Roy muttered, feeling for his gear. "Weapon? Gone. Comms? Dead." They were stranded, unarmed, and disoriented. It didn't take long for the others to figure it out. Lieutenant Harper from Delta, Corporal Ivanov from Spetsnaz, and a couple of others, all from elite units, all handpicked for reasons they didn't yet understand. The confusion was palpable, but the discipline remained. They were soldiers, trained to adapt, to survive, to fight. "Stay low," Roy ordered. "We don't know what's out there." As if on cue, a low humming noise started. At first, it was barely audible, but then it grew louder, echoing through the jungle like some distant machine gearing up for a deadly task. And then they saw them, through the thick foliage, humanoid figures, tall, heavily armored, with weapons that glowed faintly in the alien light. These weren't just creatures, they were hunters. The aliens moved with a deliberate grace, scanning the area, communicating through guttural sounds they couldn't understand. They weren't searching, they were herding. "Shit," Harper muttered. "They're hunting us." It became clear in an instant. This wasn't just a crash or an accident. They were being used, like animals, for sport. They were prey. Roy's mind raced, analyzing the situation. Their weapons were far more advanced than anything humans had. And yet, something in the way they moved, in the arrogance of their postures, gave them away. They thought this was easy. They thought humans were easy. "We need to move," Roy whispered sharply. "Quietly. We'll get out of here, regroup, and figure out what we're dealing with." They moved silently through the underbrush, their years of training taking over. Every snap of a twig felt amplified, every breath a potential giveaway. They weren't just up against better technology. These creatures had an advantage in every way. But Roy knew the arrogance of predators all too well. In the distance, a soldier, someone Roy hadn't even noticed earlier, let out a brief, sharp scream. The aliens had found their first target. "They're picking us off," Diaz whispered, his voice trembling. "What the hell are we supposed to do against this?" Roy crouched down, pulling Diaz by the arm. "We stick together. We use our brains. These things might have the tech, but they don't know us." The group kept moving, the sounds of distant screams and guttural alien communication filling the air. Roy's mind was racing. What was their plan? Why go through all this effort to capture them? What kind of creatures hunted soldiers for sport? Then it hit him. It wasn't just a hunt. It was a show. They were being watched. "We're on display," Roy said quietly, barely audible. "This is a spectacle." The realization hung in the air like a weight. They weren't just prey, they were entertainment. Somewhere out there, beings far removed from this jungle were watching them struggle, waiting for them to break. But Roy wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. If they wanted a show, they were going to get one, just not the one they expected. The group reached a small clearing, where the air felt different, thicker, charged with energy. There were no sounds of aliens, no hum of weapons, just an unsettling stillness. "We'll make our stand here," Roy said. "They won't see it coming." The others looked at him, uncertain but trusting. They had no choice. It was either fight or die like animals. But Roy wasn't ready to die. Not yet. He had a plan. They weren't just soldiers. They were predators too, and they were going to remind these aliens exactly why humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The jungle was alive with the sounds of the hunt, but now, something had changed. The soldiers had stopped running. They weren't prey anymore, and the Zdarian hunters were beginning to realize it. Roy crouched in the shadows, watching the aliens move through the trees, their footsteps silent but their presence unmistakable. He could see it in the way they moved, calculated, predatory. But they had a weakness, their arrogance. They expected the humans to keep running, to keep hiding, to stay afraid. They didn't know what was coming. "They're getting closer," whispered Harper, eyes darting toward the moving shapes in the distance. "We need to hit them now." Roy nodded. "We've set the traps. Now we wait. They'll walk right into it." The group had spent the last few hours turning the alien environment into their weapon. Using whatever they could find, sharp-edged foliage, rocks, vines, they'd set crude but effective traps. The Zdarians thought they were in control, but they were walking into a battleground they didn't understand. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. Then, a faint rustling, a low growl. The first of the aliens stepped into the trap. The vine tightened around its armored leg, yanking it into the air. The creature let out a guttural roar, flailing as it was suspended upside down. The others paused, momentarily confused, unsure how to react. That was all the humans needed. "No," Roy said, his voice barely a whisper, but the signal was clear. The group moved with deadly precision. Harper darted forward, using a sharpened stick to jam into the alien's exposed joint. The creature howled in pain, thrashing, but its strength was meaningless now. Diaz launched a heavy rock, crushing the skull of another alien that tried to advance. They were fighting with nothing but their surroundings, primitive weapons, but it worked. The element of surprise was theirs. "They're starting to figure it out," Ivanov said, his Russian accent thick as he watched the other aliens regroup. "We won't have much time before they adapt." "They'll adapt," Roy agreed. "But so will we." The Zdarians were smarter than expected. They didn't fall back into panic as humans might. Instead, they formed a tight formation, communicating through guttural sounds, preparing for a counterattack. They were regrouping fast, their technological advantage clear as their armor adjusted to the humans' attacks. They wouldn't fall for the same tricks twice. "They're pissed now," Harper muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "What's the next move?" Roy glanced at the advancing aliens, their weapons glowing with energy, their steps more cautious but determined. The traps had worked once, but now they were up against a force that wouldn't make the same mistake again. The situation had escalated. "We need to split them up," Roy said. "They rely too much on their tech and formation. We'll draw them into smaller groups. Make them fight us on our terms." The plan was risky, but it was their only shot. They couldn't face the aliens head-on, not with their energy weapons and advanced armor. But humans weren't built for brute strength. They were built for survival, for adaptation. And right now, that meant using every trick in the book. Roy and the others moved through the jungle like shadows, making noise in strategic places, leading the aliens deeper into the trees. It was a dangerous game of cat and mouse, but Roy knew the terrain better now. They had studied it, understood its quirks. And the Zdarians, for all their advanced technology, were still outsiders. It wasn't long before the aliens fell for it. Two of them broke away from the main group, following the noise of what they thought were fleeing humans. Roy and Harper moved in quickly, using the cover of the dense foliage. They didn't need weapons, they had the jungle itself. Harper dropped silently from a tree, landing on the back of one of the Zdarians, using the creature's own weight against it. The alien fell hard, crashing into the ground, its weapon clattering away. Roy didn't waste a second. He grabbed a sharpened rock and drove it into the creature's neck, just below the helmet. The alien gurgled, its glowing eyes flickering before dimming. "Two down," Harper whispered. "How many left?" "Enough to still kill us if we're not smart," Roy replied, wiping the sweat from his face. They were winning small battles, but the war was far from over. The remaining Zdarians were furious now. They had lost several of their own, and it showed in the way they moved, more aggressive, less cautious. Their honor was on the line, and they weren't about to let a group of primitive humans get the best of them. But that anger was their downfall. The humans had learned early in their military careers that rage clouded judgment. They kept moving, kept luring the aliens into traps, splitting them up, taking them down one by one. Every kill was swift, precise. There was no room for mistakes. "They're adapting too slowly," Ivanov observed as he watched another Zdarian fall to a hidden spike trap. "They think their strength will save them. They don't know what it means to be human," Roy said, his voice low. "It's not about strength. It's about survival. We're the top of the food chain for a reason." The alien bodies were piling up now, scattered throughout the jungle. The Zdarians had underestimated them, and that mistake was costing them dearly. But Roy knew this wasn't over yet. The leader of the hunting party was still out there, and he wasn't going to take this loss lightly. "They'll come back stronger," Roy said. "And when they do, we'll be ready." The air was heavy with tension. The remaining Zdarians, though diminished in number, were no longer careless. They moved with a cold, calculated determination, their leader at the forefront. This wasn't a hunt anymore, it was a battle of survival for both sides. Roy and his team could feel the shift. The aliens weren't simply chasing them down, they were preparing for a final confrontation. "They're regrouping," Harper whispered, keeping low behind a fallen tree, scanning the clearing where the aliens had gathered. "Looks like they're calling for reinforcements." Roy's eyes narrowed. "They're desperate. They know they're losing." But desperate didn't mean weak. The Zdarian warlord was relentless, rallying his warriors with guttural commands. Their energy weapons were drawn, scanning the jungle for any sign of the humans, and their advanced armor was adjusting, compensating for the injuries they had sustained. These aliens were no longer playing by their original rules. They were prepared to do whatever it took to win. Roy turned to the group, his voice calm but urgent. "They're trying to force us into a corner. We can't let them box us in. We need to strike first. Hard." The plan was simple: hit them before they had a chance to fully regroup. The humans had already proven they could turn the jungle into their weapon. Now, they had to go on the offensive before the aliens' reinforcements arrived. "They've still got the tech advantage," Diaz muttered, eyeing the glowing energy shields flickering around the aliens. "We need to shut that down." Roy nodded. "We can't take them head-on with those shields. But they've got a blind spot." Harper smirked. "Always do. Let's exploit it." The soldiers moved with precision, using the thick jungle as their cover. They knew the Zdarians were stronger, faster, and more technologically advanced. But what they lacked was flexibility. They relied on their gear, their systems, their superior firepower. What they didn't understand was the humans' ability to adapt, to think on their feet. As they closed in, Roy noticed something. The leader, the warlord, his armor was different. Sleeker, more integrated into his body. He wasn't just any soldier, this was the apex of their military power. He was their best. And he wasn't going to fall easily. "We take him down, and the rest will crumble," Roy said, locking eyes with Harper. Harper grinned. "Thought you'd never ask." They launched their attack in coordinated silence. Harper and Ivanov hit first, flanking the group, drawing their attention away from the others. It was a hit-and-run strategy, designed to disorient the Zdarians, to make them question where the next attack would come from. The aliens returned fire, but the humans were already gone, slipping back into the trees like ghosts. Diaz moved next, a crude but effective EMP device strapped to his chest. It was their only chance to take down the shields, even for just a few seconds. Roy knew it was a suicide run, but Diaz was the only one who could get close enough. "I'll get in, don't worry about me," Diaz said, locking eyes with Roy. "Just be ready." Roy nodded, and without another word, Diaz took off, sprinting through the underbrush, dodging alien fire as he made his way toward the leader. The EMP charge was armed, the countdown ticking. Diaz weaved through the chaos, his breathing steady despite the danger surrounding him. He reached the edge of the clearing, just close enough to trigger the device. The blast went off with a loud crack, and for a brief moment, the Zdarians' shields flickered and died. "Now!" Roy shouted. They moved in unison. Harper and Ivanov took down 2 aliens with precision shots, while Roy charged straight toward the leader. The warlord, disoriented by the loss of his shield, stumbled but quickly recovered, drawing a massive, glowing blade from his side. He roared, a guttural, primal sound that shook the air around them. Roy didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, ducking under a wild swing of the alien's blade, his body moving on instinct. The warlord was fast, but Roy was faster, his training and survival instincts sharper than ever. He landed a blow to the warlord's side, the makeshift blade cutting deep into the alien's armor, but not deep enough. The warlord retaliated, slamming his fist into Roy's chest, sending him sprawling backward. "Roy!" Harper shouted, firing at the alien leader, but the warlord's armor had already started regenerating. The alien was relentless, bearing down on Roy with the full force of his strength. Roy struggled to his feet, his chest burning from the impact. He could feel the warlord's eyes on him, glowing with hatred and fury. The alien lunged again, but this time Roy was ready. He sidestepped, grabbing a broken spear from the ground, and drove it upward into the warlord's exposed neck, just below his helmet. The alien let out a strangled roar, blood pouring from the wound. Roy twisted the spear, pushing it deeper until the warlord's body went limp, collapsing to the ground in a heap. For a moment there was silence. Then chaos erupted. The remaining Zdarians, seeing their leader fall, panicked. Without their warlord, their discipline crumbled. They fired wildly, retreating back into the jungle, but the humans weren't going to let them escape. Harper, Ivanov, and Diaz moved in, picking off the remaining aliens with ruthless efficiency. The Zdarians, despite their advanced technology and weapons, were no match for the humans' determination and adaptability. One by one they fell, until the jungle was quiet again. Roy stood over the body of the warlord, breathing hard, his hands shaking from the adrenaline. The Zdarian leader, once so invincible, lay dead at his feet. "They'll be back," Harper said, stepping up beside him. Roy nodded. "They'll come with more next time. But they'll know what we're capable of now." The group stood in the clearing, surrounded by the bodies of their enemies. They had won this battle, but they knew the war was far from over. Roy stood over the remains of the warlord, the weight of their victory heavy on his shoulders. The jungle had fallen into an eerie silence, the sounds of battle fading into the oppressive heat. The team regrouped, their faces grim, the adrenaline slowly leaving their bodies. They had won, but no one was celebrating. They all knew this was just the beginning. "They'll be regrouping soon," Harper said, her eyes scanning the treeline. "We bought ourselves some time, but not much." Diaz wiped the sweat from his brow, adjusting the strap on his rifle. "We need to figure out our next move before they send reinforcements. We're not going to survive another wave like that without more ammo and supplies." Roy's mind was already racing ahead, weighing their options. The jungle had given them cover, but it had also boxed them in. If the Zdarians returned in greater numbers, their chances of holding out were slim. "We can't stay here," Roy said finally, his voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. "We need to push forward. If we stay put, we're sitting ducks." Ivanov, who had been quietly examining the alien tech scattered around the clearing, spoke up. "There's something off about their tactics. These Zdarians, they weren't just fighting us. They were stalling." Harper frowned. "Stalling? For what?" "I don't know yet," Ivanov said, his tone cautious. "But they weren't as aggressive as they could have been. Their firepower was enough to overwhelm us easily, but they didn't. They were holding back." The implication settled over the group like a thick fog. Roy felt a sinking feeling in his gut. This wasn't just about wiping them out, it was something more. "They were testing us," Roy said quietly, piecing it together. "They wanted to see how we'd fight, how we'd adapt. This whole thing was a reconnaissance mission." Harper swore under her breath. "They're gathering intel on us, figuring out how to counter our strategies." Diaz shook his head in disbelief. So, we're not just dealing with a bunch of dumb warriors. They're learning. Roy nodded, grim. And the next wave won't make the same mistakes. They'll come back stronger, smarter, and ready for us. Silence hung between them for a moment, the reality of their situation sinking in. The Zdarians weren't just another alien species to fight. They were a relentless, evolving enemy. And that made them even more dangerous. Roy knew they couldn't afford to wait around for the next attack. They needed to act now, before the Zdarians adapted to their tactics completely. But without more supplies, without a solid plan, it felt like they were running on borrowed time. There's got to be something we can use from their tech, Roy said, turning to Ivanov. Can you get anything operational? Ivanov shook his head. Most of it's either damaged or encrypted. Their systems are built to self-destruct if tampered with. I can try to piece together something, but it won't be enough to turn the tide in our favor. Roy clenched his jaw, frustration gnawing at him. They were outmatched in every way: firepower, technology, numbers. But what they lacked in resources, they made up for in resilience. They had to keep moving, keep pushing forward, no matter the odds. We move toward their stronghold, Roy decided, his voice resolute. We can't win by staying on the defensive. If we take the fight to them, hit them where it hurts, we might stand a chance. Harper raised an eyebrow. You're talking about storming an alien base with 5 people and no backup. Better than waiting here to get picked off, Roy countered. If we can disrupt their operations, maybe take out some of their leadership, we could slow them down long enough to regroup with any surviving forces. Diaz nodded slowly. It's a long shot, but it's the only shot we've got. Harper didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. They all knew the situation was desperate. There were no good options, only the ones that gave them the slimmest chance of survival. Ivanov stood, brushing dirt off his hands. We'll need to move fast. If they really are gathering reinforcements, we're already running out of time. Roy's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the dense jungle stretched out endlessly before them. Somewhere out there, the Zdarian stronghold waited, and with it, the answers they desperately needed. He didn't know what they'd find, or if any of them would make it out alive. But standing still wasn't an option anymore. Then let's move, Roy said, his tone final. We take the fight to them. The group set off, moving through the jungle with renewed urgency. The oppressive heat and the weight of their mission pressed down on them, but no one complained. They all understood what was at stake. Every step they took brought them closer to the heart of the Zdarian operation, and closer to whatever deadly plans the aliens were preparing. As they pushed deeper into the jungle, Roy couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The Zdarians had been watching them, learning from their every move. And now, as they approached the enemy's territory, it felt like the hunters had become the hunted. But they couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when they were so close. We're going to need to find a way to get past their outer defenses, Harper said, keeping her voice low as they moved through the dense foliage. If they have patrols out here, we'll be spotted long before we get anywhere near the stronghold. Ivanov, Roy said, glancing over at the soldier. Anything you can pull from the tech that'll help us slip past? Ivanov shook his head. Not unless you've got a couple hours and a full lab at your disposal. We're going in blind, Roy grimaced. Then we go quiet, stay low, and hope for the best. The tension was palpable as they neared the edge of the jungle. In the distance, just beyond a ridge, Roy could see the first signs of the Zdarian stronghold, massive towers jutting into the sky, their sleek, alien design a stark contrast to the natural world around them. We'll recon first, Roy said, signaling the others to stop. Find their weak points. But just as he spoke, a loud, mechanical sound echoed through the jungle. Roy's heart sank. The Zdarians weren't waiting for them, they were coming. In the distance, a fleet of alien ships began to rise into the sky, their engines roaring as they prepared for war.